everything right, it was you and me.
Hello my beautiful friends of the internet, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Nayeema if you are new here, and today we have such an exciting video. Basically, I'm going over my favorite books of 2021, which if you are a book lover, which I know all of you guys are, is incredibly hard to narrow down your favorite books of the year. Like, I read around 150 books this year, so it was hell picking these, but in my heart of hearts I knew which ones were the ones. So be sure to let me know down below your favorite books of the year. I would love to add them to my TBR. And also last year I made one of these videos, so I'll have that link down below if you guys want to see my favorite books of last year. Also, the lighting kind of sucks right now. It is 4:30 and the sun is coming down. So first of all, I chose 11 books and then I think maybe 5 honorable mentions. There's absolutely no way that I could not include all the books I'm going to talk about today. So for the honorable mentions, I won't go into much detail about what they're about, but then for my actual like favorites of the year, then I'll do a little description and tell you guys why it's my favorite. I have 11 books that I've chose as favorites. These are not in order. I could never rank these. There's no way in hell I'd be able to say which ones in order are my favorites, because I don't even think I have an order in my mind. Yeah, let's just get right into the honorable mentions. Okay, so the first honorable mention is Normal People by Sally Rooney. This was so close to making it on my favorites list. I loved this book when I read it. It's just I haven't really been thinking much of it since I've read it, and it is such a beautiful story, but I just hate sad endings and I couldn't stand this. I have a reading blog up of me crying. It's in my TikTok reading blog, so if you want to see my reactions to that, you definitely should. I love this book though, and it's definitely a really good honorable mention. The next one is Lilac, and I read this one in one night. I love BB Reed. I love her as an author. I love all the books I've read by her, and this one is just so special to me because it is the first, I think this is the first reverse harem that I've ever read, or I've read reverse harems that she's ended up with one of the guys. This one she ends up with all 3 of them, and it is not my typical vibe at all. It's also a rock star romance. It's a reverse harem, so all the cards were stacked against this book, but I ended up eating it up. I read it all night. It was amazing. I loved my time with it, and the writing is absolutely stunning, so I had to add this one for honorable mention. Another honorable mention is Luster, and I read this book earlier in the year. This is a millennial fiction, and it is such a good story. I loved millennial fiction earlier in the year, and millennial fiction is just 20-year-old fiction. Like, they don't know what they're doing with their lives, and they're a hot mess, mental health issues, going crazy. That's the vibe, and I loved that earlier, which one of my favorite books is definitely on the millennial fiction list. But yeah, I just loved Luster so much. It was such a good read. You guys should definitely check it out if you just want to read about 20-year-olds who have no idea what they're doing with their life. It was amazing. And my last honorable mention is Break Me by Megan Brandy, and this one is just to say that I really love Megan Brandy and I love her writing, and this book is probably one of my favorites that she's ever written. I was so hooked. I took melatonin to fall asleep. I literally didn't fall asleep because I was so into this book. It had me in a chokehold. I was so obsessed. It is such an amazing book, so it's definitely going on my honorable mentions list. So now that we got all of those out of the way, we can start talking about my actual favorites. Again, these are not in any order at all. Okay, so my first favorite is Wolf Song by TJ Klune. If you've been watching me for a while, you would know that this book is one of my absolute favorite books ever. It is so funny and beautiful and magical and lyrical. This is an shifter romance. I love werewolves. When I read this, I was just so invested, and it was such a beautiful time. I also have a reading vlog up reading this book also. Literally at a restaurant with my family, and I had an AirPod in. I stuck an AirPod in and listened to the audiobook because I was just so into, I just loved this book. Follows Ox and Joe. Ox has always been told his entire life that he'd never like amount to anything, that he's stupid, that he's dumb. His father left when he was young, and he put so much pressure on himself to say like, I'm the man now, I need to take care of my mom. So when he's 16, he gets a job at the body shop that his father used to work at, and they kind of live in like this, I want to say like rural area. When Ox turns 16, I believe, a family moves in across the street, and Ox meets the little boy of the family named Joe. And so Joe and Ox started off as best friends all throughout their like developmental years. Ox becomes entwined in their family. It is such a great, such a beautiful family, and he ends up having a super strong connection with Joe. Now Joe is very young at this age and Ox is 16, but they start off as friends. They're best friends. Their families are friends. They just have such a deep connection. The family is such a stunning family. Like, they are, I loved reading about them. A few years go by and I believe Ox finds out about the family secret, and that's that they are werewolves. With that, Ox becomes entwined in that, and as they're growing up, Joe and Ox just have such a strong connection. There's always been a connection there. They just fall in love. I just, like, this book took me on such a journey. Ox is such a special character to read about. Like, he has such a beautiful soul, and I'm gonna cry just thinking about it. He is one of the best characters I've ever read about. It was just such a good book. I have dreams about this book. I think about it all the time. It's definitely one of my favorites. The next book on my favorites list is It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey, and this book, I have talked about this book so many times on my channel. I am constantly thinking about this book. I talk about it all the time with my friends that like to read, and this book just means the absolute world to me, and I have no idea why. I think it really had to do with the characters. I just loved the whole dynamic between Piper and Brendan. Piper is an LA influencer, and she gets into a little bit of trouble one night, and her stepfather decides to send her away to this small fisher town that her father, who passed away, used to live at, and that's where her mom and her father met at first. She used to live there when she was younger, but now she lives in LA. So Piper is very unhappy about her having to spend a few months in this small fisher town where nobody cares that she's famous, nobody cares that she's an influencer. They really care about like the contents of your heart, how you love and express love, and being there for one another, like the community. So when Brendan first sees Piper, Piper walks into the bar that her father used to own, and Brendan's like, oh no, who is this little like LA influencer who thinks she's a shit? Like, no, that is not gonna fly in my town. And at first they get off on the wrong foot. I wouldn't say it's hate to love, but it's definitely dislike to love. Brendan realizes that this is not being representative of his town that he loves so much. So he starts helping Piper out and taking Piper under his wings and helping repair the bar that her father used to own. And they become good friends at first. Sooner than later, the tension can't be denied between them. They have amazing chemistry and the sparks just fly. Brendan is incredibly obsessed with Piper. Like, he is a simp. Like, I loved reading about his reaction to Piper. I love when they first decide to give in to all the temptation. It was such a good book. And I think about this all the time. Today I was like, should I just drop everything and reread this? Because I was thinking about this one line that Brendan said. I just, wow, this book is so good, and it's definitely one of my favorites. I'm going to be making a priority to reread this really soon. The next book that I'm considering a favorite is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid, and I read this book in January, I believe. I listened to the audiobook one night and completely zoned out and was just so into the story. This is such a beautiful, beautiful book, and it really broke my heart and made me sob, and it was just such a fun read. I definitely recommend listening to the audiobook when you read this if it's available to you. I just know I wouldn't have enjoyed it as much if I didn't have the audiobook. The audiobook was like a cinematic movie. Wow. The book follows a band in the 60s and 70s, Daisy Jones and the Six, and it shows how they got their start, the rise of them, the fall of Daisy Jones and the Six, and the aftermath after, what tore them apart, their relationships within the band, the dynamics between the band, and wow. So many people had recommended it to me before, and I was like, oh, I'll get to it, but no, this book truly spoke to me. I thought the writing was so beautiful. I thought the audiobook narrators were amazing. I believe they got like a new voice actor for every single character. It was a trip. Like, I feel like I hallucinated my whole experience listening to this, and it is such a good book. I really want to reread it soon and annotate it. But I love this book, and I couldn't imagine it not being on this favorites list. My next favorite book that I'm going to be talking to you guys about today is Kiss the Sky by Krista and Becca Ritchie. I'm gonna just cry talking about this book. I literally don't think I'll be able to handle describing why I love it so much, because it just, love this book. It's definitely my favorite thus far in the Addicted/Calloway Sisters series. I am just obsessed with everything Connor and Rose, and not only that, all the friendships in here. This book, dynamics, the relationships with everyone in this book, it just, wow, it really made me love this series even more. I'm literally crying. Why? Okay, one second. First of all, I can't really go into much detail about what this book is about because I don't want to spoil the other things that happen in the first 3 books in the Addicted series, but I will say this is the first book in the Calloway Sisters series, which is like interconnected. It follows Rose and Connor. I love Rose and Connor. I loved being inside Connor and Rose's mind. Before I read Kiss the Sky, I really didn't love Connor and Rose all that much, just because they were always arguing. They were always, it just kind of seemed a little bit boring to me. They were rivals to lovers, and I don't know, I just wasn't that interested and intrigued by the relationship. And when I read this, I was in shock. I never expected these characters. First of all, I'm really just thinking about Connor. I related to Connor so much, like everything that he went through, every feeling that he has about not being able to express feelings and emotions very well, like that just really spoke to me. Loved seeing his perspective of the people that he calls family and the people that he loves and his friends. Like I loved every moment of that. Connor just had such a different perspective, and it was really refreshing because in the other books I didn't think he really cared all that much about all the other people in the friend group, like Lily, Reich, Lo, Daisy. Like I didn't think he cared that much. Learned so much and that he cared so much about them. Loved being in his mind. And Rose is a favorite as well. She is just like a high maintenance queen. I loved her after reading this book, but this book really brought the whole series together for me. Reich and Daisy had to kind of care about Lily and Lo just because obviously they're family, and same with Rose. But Connor, he didn't really have any attachment, and it's just like such an amazing found family, and he found his place. I could never shut up about this book. Like it is so amazing. This is definitely one of my favorite books. Wow, just stunning. You need to read the Addicted / Calloway Sister series if you have not already. It's amazing. The next book that is going on my favorites list is Haunting Adeline by H.D. Carlton, and I really love this book. Not only is it a stalker romance, it just had such cool parallels to the past between the heroine and her great-grandmother. This book follows Adeline, and she is a very well-known author. When her grandmother dies, she inherits the house that her grandmother lived in her entire life. Adeline loved this house. She always loved visiting because there was just like this magic and this mystery. She was just always drawn to the house. So when she moves in, she finds a diary that her great-great-grandmother used to write in, and she would talk about having a stalker and a lover and all these mysteries in her diary. And as she's reading about her great-grandmother's stalker and her relationship with her stalker, Adeline is being stalked. This is a really dark romance. This guy, he sees Adeline at a book signing, and he becomes obsessed. He starts stalking her and leaving little hints around the house and moving things. And when Adeline would bring home like a boy, you would never hear from that boy again. Like he was gone. Adeline is very confused and scared at first, but then she kind of starts like taunting him and seeing like, what is this? What is going on? And it is such an amazing story. I love this book. I loved how dark it was. Stalker romances are my favorite. I cannot wait for Hunting Adeline to come out. It comes out early 2022, and you know I am running to buy this book. My next favorite book that I'm going to talk to you guys about today is My Year of Rest and Relaxation by 𝓫𝓸𝓬𝓲𝓪, and this book is such an amazing read. I read it in the early 2000s. No, I read it earlier this year, and since I read it, I've never been able to stop thinking about how amazing this was. So this book follows underneath the genre of millennial fiction that was dubbed the name, I guess, and I love this book. So basically this follows an unnamed narrator in the year 2000, and she is very wealthy and very depressed and very privileged, but she hates her life and she's incredibly depressed. She just wants to sleep all day and every day. It's really interesting because she lies to her therapist, who is not really a good therapist, and she basically gets prescribed a bunch of sleeping medication because she lies about the fact that she can't sleep. So she takes the pills, and then she goes downstairs to the bodega and chugs a bunch of coffee and wakes up, and that's just like how she wants to live her life. You see her relationships with her ex-boyfriend, her best friend, her therapist. It's just so interesting. I loved reading about it, and this follows a really unlikable narrator, which I love reading stories like this. She was incredibly unlikable. It was so hard to read in her perspective, but also so much fun because she definitely has thoughts that I'm like, you would never say out loud, but you're thinking it all the time. I just really love being in her mind. She's definitely like a dirty, grungy character, but it was so much fun to read about. And this book has stayed my favorite book. At the end of the book, there's just like this thing that happens that chills me to my core. I just need to do a reread of this soon because it was an amazing book. The next book that I'm going to talk to you guys about today is Act Your Age, Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert, and I read this in March when it first came out. It is definitely my favorite in the Brown Sisters trilogy. Eve Brown is just such a fun, loving soul. She is somebody that I just love to read about because her energy and the way she acts, I don't know, it just always made me so happy, especially reading Chloe Brown and Danny Brown. This book follows Eve Brown, and she has always gone from business venture to business venture, just never really finding anything that she could call her career and that she could stick with in love. One day her parents are fed up with her and they're like, listen, you need to get a job, you need to move out of here, and they stop funding her life, allowed to get her inheritance back if she gets a job and gets a life and acts her age. And one day Eve is driving around town and she comes across this bed and breakfast help wanted sign for a cook. Eve pulls over, she gets out of the car and goes in her regular day clothes, not like proper interview attire, and interviews for the job. She meets Jacob, who actually owns the bed and breakfast, and he immediately sees Eve and he's like, no, look at the way she came in, dressing like a clown. She has like 50 million different colors on. She didn't even bring a CV or like a resume. He's like, no, I'm not giving her this job. But Jacob is in a desperate time pinch. He needs to find a cook for his bed and breakfast because of he's like catering like the fair or something like that, or some type of festival. Ends up hiring Eve Brown. They had such a sweet and cute meet cute. They had so many interactions between each other, and the smut in here was fantastic. Don't think I will ever get over the smut. Whenever I think about best smut scenes, I think about the scenes in here, and you would not think it because it is so cute and such a cute little cover. And look at Jacob. You see that? Like, Jacob, no. Like, there's no way that Jacob, you would think that Jacob knows what he's doing, but he does. And it was amazing, and I think about this book all the time. It lives on my mind, and it is definitely one of my favorite books. And the next book that I'm going to talk to you guys about today is A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson, and I was actually gifted this for my birthday, so thank you so much, Nicole. And this is probably like one of my all-time favorite books. A Dracula's Bride's retelling follows the main character Constanta. It's basically a letter from her to Dracula about like the start of their relationship and how everything was so perfect and she was so in love with him, but in reality this relationship was incredibly toxic. He wouldn't let her leave the house. It just does in such a beautiful recount of toxic relationships and the way he would treat her, and just like memories that she would have in letter form, and also when he adds his other bride and his other husband to the mix. It just gets really crazy. Two brides and the one husband, they find love together without Dracula, and it's such like, I don't think I've ever read a prettier book than this. It is so dreamy and it is so lyrical and beautiful. I just think about this book all the time. Definitely like my most annotated book. There's so many annotations in here just of my favorite lines, things that she would say that I'm like, oh, like why was that so good? Like, it was beautiful. I have so many quotes in this book in my notes app, just like I just scroll through them for serotonin because they're so stunning, and this is definitely one of my favorite books of the entire year. The next book that I'm going to talk to you guys about today is The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. I did not expect to love it as much as I did. Cover, I don't like science. Like, I am not a science person, so I wasn't that intrigued, but I did hear that this was really cute, so I decided to get into it. And this is a fake dating romance. If you have not read this yet, if you haven't, what are you doing? All the rumors are true. This book is amazing and you need to read it and you need to have it in your life. So this book follows Olive, and she is a third-year PhD student, and she has not had a lot of luck with dating in her life. She starts dating this guy who's also in her program, and the relationship kind of doesn't fizzle out into anything. But a few weeks or months later, Olive's best friend decides that she's really into the guy that Olive used to date, and Olive can tell that that guy is really into her best friend as well. Olive is trying to push these two together, but her best friend won't go out with him and won't give him a chance because Olive used to date him. But Olive is like, no, over him, like I am dating someone new, so there's no way I'm still into him. Obviously, Olive is lying. She is in fact not dating someone new. Olive tells her best friend that she is going on a date one night, and she's lying because she has no one to go on a date with. And so she actually ends up going to the lab to work. Olive does not expect to see her best friend rounding the corner when Olive is supposed to be on this fake date. And so Olive freaks out and kisses the closest guy to her, which is Adam. Adam is a professor that no one really likes in her program. He is a really harsh grader. He doesn't give much slack, so he is not well liked at all. But when Olive kisses Adam and explains why she did that, Adam really wants to fake date Olive to keep the ruse going that basically she's over that guy. What I love about this book is that the fact that Adam has been obsessed with Olive for years. He is so obsessed with her and would do anything for her, and he is just kind of like an awkward soul. Like, he has a really awkward personality, which I just found so cute. And I loved just the relationship together and how guy falls first in this. I just love fake dating. Fake dating is one of my favorite tropes ever. So this book really fed me. I was going through a reading slump at the time that I read this, and it brought me out of my reading slump. It was amazing. My next favorite book of the year is All Roads Lead Here by Mariana Zapata. I read this recently and I knew as soon as I finished it that it would be one of my favorite books of the entire year. So I don't read Mariana Zapata very often just because the books are massive and they take a big chunk of your time, and whenever I would read her, I would listen to the audiobook, and there was no audiobook on Hoopla or Scribd for All Roads Lead Here, but I decided to just go in and read it physically on my Kindle, and it was the best time that I've had in a long time while reading. It was just so stunning and comforting, and I just felt so like at home while reading it, which doesn't make sense because I've never lived in like a snowy mountain area, but there's just something about it that just makes me feel, I don't know, so comforted. So this book follows Aurora, and Aurora is on the road. She is just kind of trying to start over with her life. She's been on the road for months now. She just got out of a relationship with her boyfriend that she's had for years. Her boyfriend has always kind of treated her badly. He is a famous rock star, and when he breaks up with her, she is devastated, completely devastated. In the time being, she's like on the road for months, just driving around, just visiting a bunch of different places, and she ultimately decides that she wants to go home to where she grew up before her mom passed away. Aurora and her mom used to live in this small town in Colorado. Aurora had to move away when her mom died, and she moved in with her grandparents, I believe. Aurora decides to get an Airbnb. It's like a garage apartment. She decides to stay there for some time being until she decides if this is where she really wants to stay for a long term. So she pulls up to the garage apartment and she lets herself in, because that's what you do with like an Airbnb, you let yourself in. And she does not expect to see Tobias Rhodes there, and Tobias is pissed. He has no idea who this woman is in his garage apartment, and he wants her out. He wants answers, and they both find out that Tobias's younger son actually decided to rent out the garage apartment for the reason of making money to get a new guitar or something like that. And he doesn't expect Tobias to be home because he travels a lot for work, so he expected him to be gone. Tobias is in fact not gone. He is there and he is livid. He is kind of like a grumpy mountain man, so he doesn't like strangers. He doesn't want people living in his space and in his home. So he ultimately decides to let Aurora stay, obviously, and they have a really rocky start. Aurora thinks that he does not like her because obviously he never wanted her there in the first place, and she's not really allowed to be in like the main house. She's not allowed to be in the main house, and she's not allowed to talk to his son, and that's like the rules they set out. But they obviously end up talking to each other a bunch. They live like right on top of each other. So such an amazing story. It made me so sad and it made me so happy, and Tobias is just such a grump, which I love, and Aurora is like a sunshine character, which is really fun to read about always, especially she's going through so much, the breakup, the loss of her mom, but she still had a really sunshiny character. I love this book. I can't explain it, why I love it the way I love it, but I just do, and it makes me so happy, and I cannot wait to own this book physically. It just, it literally means so much to me. I love this book. And then the next book that I'm going to talk to you guys about is Dothi Khanna by Runex. This is a book that I read and fell in love with because it is just so me and so my vibe. This book follows Corvina, and Corvina is kind of a little bit of a weird character. She's super spiritual. She reads tarot. She has a bunch of crystals. Raised in the woods in a small town by her mom. There was so many rumors circulating around the town that these two were witches. Her mom and her were witches. They both have purple eyes. So we don't really get much of a background in the beginning of this book. All we know is that Corvina wants a fresh start, so she's deciding to go away to this university called University of 𝓵𝓸𝓬𝓲𝓪. So she gets like this random letter. She didn't even apply to go here, but she gets a letter asking if she would like to attend, and she decides to. She is 21, so she's getting a little bit of a late start to college. She decides to go. Corvina like feels energies, and she feels spirits, and she just feels like the vibes of things, and she feels that this is a very weird haunted kind of energy of the university. And I just love the setting because it takes place at this like old castle in the woods in the middle of nowhere. Basically this is like a teacher-student romance. There are some mysteries that are going on. I know a lot of people don't like teacher-student romances, but she is over the age. He is like a professor. They just have this really weird chemistry, and it's super spooky and such a good book to read in the October time. It is so much fun to read about, and I love this book. I just was so invested. Whenever I left my apartment, I would literally just be thinking about this book and when I could go home and read it. And yeah, I was just so invested. It is everything that I love in romance book. I love the dark elements. I love the mystery elements. I love, Ksarina was probably the most different character that I've ever read about, because she was super spiritual, and I don't know, she's into a lot of the same things that I'm into. So I was so much fun, and it's definitely a favorite, and Runex has become a favorite author of mine for sure in 2021 as well. And the last book that I'm going to be talking to you guys about today is 𝓼𝓸𝓬𝓲𝓪 by Sophie Lark. This is from one of my favorite series ever, which is the Kingmaker series by Sophie Lark. In the year 2021, I found Sophie Lark, and I have never gone back. She's one of my favorite authors now, and it is just such a stunning book. I originally started with The Brutal Prince and then hopped into the Kingmaker series, and 𝓼𝓸𝓬𝓲𝓪 took my breath away. It is such an amazing story. I loved it. This is the book that sealed the deal with my love for Sophie Lark. So this book follows Leo and Anna. Leo and Anna are both children of mafias. They're seniors in high school, and they are like applying to college or whatever, and they both decide to go to Kingmaker's University. And Kingmaker's University is basically like a mafia university where children of mafia bosses go, and they learn to take over their family's mafias. There's different divisions. There is like the spy, there's the air division, and the accountant, and they both decide to go. And they have been raised as cousins and best friends. They've been best friends for years. They've been raised as cousins. They're not blood related at all. It's just their families are super woven in together. Mafias in their families and a bunch of things like that. So they were just raised as cousins. They ultimately just got to go to Kingmaker's together. Kingmaker's is brutal. There's the rule of recompense, and it's like an eye for an eye. Whatever you do to someone will be done upon to you. It's just incredibly brutal at this university, and there is kind of like a wedge driven in between Anna and Leo. This is such a good friends to lovers romance. I used to not be a huge fan of friends to lovers, but I since have changed my mind because I've been loving friends to lovers recently. Love this book so much. Sophie Lark is so amazing. I loved how slow burn this was, which I usually don't love, but the slow burn in this literally had me aching. Wanted them to be together so badly. There's a little bit of a love triangle thrown in here with Leo's rival and enemy. It is such an amazing story, and this whole series is definitely a favorite. So I lied. There were 12 books that ended up being on my favorite list out of 150 books read. I believe it was around 5 honorable mentions. So those are my favorite books of 2021. Don't forget to comment down below if we have any of the same favorites, and also let me know some of your favorite books of 2021. I would love to know what they are, and we can discuss and see if I agree or have them as books I really like. Yeah, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, don't forget to leave a big like and a comment down below, and also subscribe so you never miss another upload from me. And I will see you very soon with a new video. Bye!
If I got one thing right, it was you and me.